Hi, thanks so much for joining. Just wanted to, before we begin, give a quick shout out to Jeanette Adams Prince and Lorena Stabins over at Monroe County BOCES. So they recently gave a webinar about online discourse, and some of the thoughts from that webinar have been taken and put into this presentation. Also, Doug Limov, who's an author of the book Teach Like a Champion and a pretty avid blogger about education, some of his thoughts are also included in this. So did want to shout them out. The BOCES presentation is linked in the description below along with their contact information. First of all, we have to ask why questions are important for online discourse, and there's really two reasons to ask questions of students. The first one would be to collect evidence of student learning, check for understanding, and things of that nature. The second would be to get students to think, and that's where real learning happens, when students have to think on their own. Once they have thought about the question you ask, it's important to do something with it. And so there's another video on this YouTube channel about working memory, but we know that once students learn something, it's important to do something with that information for them to store it into their memory, not just think about it. So all new learning really happens when we allow students to think about something or to think about a question that's at hand. So one thing also for all of us to think about is that we have to move away from thinking that closed and open questions are good or bad. There are some really great closed questions that get students to think and develop their knowledge and pull into their background knowledge. And there's some great open questions as well that do that. And the opposite is also true. Some closed questions are just a quick answer for students. They don't require any thinking. They're just reciting information. And ultimately, that's true of open-ended questions too. They can just be reciting information that they know. So when you begin to develop your questions, move away from thinking of them as closed and open as being bad and good. Think about where can students have their deep thoughts and where can they learn something new through those thoughts. So I'd like to use the context of Zoom as some of the problems with online discourse as we discuss what happens when you do a Zoom meeting and you are trying to use some questioning. So the first thing is this void of muted microphones. So if you're the teacher and you mute all the students' mics and you ask a question, it can feel very awkward during that time. And the second part is the attention and focus factor when you're in a Zoom meeting. Very different from a classroom if students are at home and there's even more things going on than in a typical classroom may be in their house. So first off, just know that muted mics are okay, and it's okay to slow down and give wait time just like you would in a classroom. It sometimes feels a bit awkward online because of the way the mics are muted and you're not sure whether students are thinking or not, but just know that that's okay, and it's important to do those things, to slow down, to give wait time. Remember, to ask a question, then give students that opportunity to think and process and create their own learning, then allow them to answer. To address the attention or focus piece, not sure there's a whole lot we can do as educators to control home environments, but here's two options that you could do. You could give a prompt and then ask students to write about the question that you asked. Then break them out into breakout rooms. When there's smaller groups, oftentimes engagement goes up. Then you can have them report back to you. A second option would be to prompt a student, then use the Zoom polling feature about that question. So ask a question, use the polling feature about that question, and then extend the question with another prompt and then launch into the breakout room. That one's has a little bit more steps to it, but the Zoom polling, I found at least, has been super engaging to our students. So you may want to include that question in a poll and then extend an extended prompt after that to get students to think when they go to their breakout rooms. So then if our goal is to have the online discourse, whether it's through writing or Schoology or anything like that, or whether it is through actual computer Zoom face-to-face, sort of face-to-face interactions, some tips for creating powerful questions. So the first one is to fake ignorance, right? So you pretend that you're the one with the problem and you say, I'm not sure what to do, and you have the students develop the answer. A second way would be to flip the question. I particularly like this one because you're including the answer. You're doing what some kids believe is the hard work of answering the question, right? But then it's on them to answer, to really answer why. So you include the answer for the question, and then you ask them why. And now they've had that opportunity to develop more in their brain and really think about the answer. A third option might be to include provisional questions, such as including might. So you would start the question with, why might this happen? Very similar to flip the question. Also to the right here, we've got the questioning grid formula. I'm somebody who likes formulas and likes checklists and things like that. So this really speaks to me, is that you can start with the left side and choose an answer there, such as how, and then move through the top and think about a second part to that question. So is or are, do, did, and all those things there. I particularly like this because you can move from factual to application pretty seamlessly using this Q grid. And on top of that, if you're differentiating your questions for breakout rooms and things of that nature, you may want to use this for students who are struggling. You can figure out which questions would be best for them. As I already stated, we're using speaking with the same as writing, but if you were to do something like this with Schoology and put a post up or an assignment, all these things that are here could be used in that to create powerful discourse, and you would have students comment on each other's post using either the formula or including some of these options for them as well. Just wanted to thank you again. I know it was short, but I hope it gives you something to think about and that you can do something with some of this information. We talked about 2 reasons for asking questions, which are to collect evidence check for understanding, and also we talked about getting students to think. And that was really the goal of this, was that we allow students to think, then have online discourse so that they could support their memory and be able to use some of the learning that they have as a vehicle for future learning. We talked about why questions lead to discourse, as I just shared. Remember that when students learn and think about something, it's important for them to do something with that information. So we talked a little bit about why, when you have those questions, they should be used to either speak or write about a topic. We talked about muted mics and the attention, and how those are things that sometimes block our discourse, but we talked about a few ways to get around that. And then we also talked about ways that could create online discourse, whether it's through writing or conversations on Zoom. So thanks so much for watching. If you have any questions, I always welcome feedback as well. Thank you.